This is the Virginia War Memorial. Inscribed on these walls are the names of those men and women who gave their lives as a result of past wars. Included in this list are the names of those unaccounted for and presumed dead, their bodies never recovered. Approximately 88,000 Americans nationwide remain unaccounted for and are presumed dead from World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. There's growing evidence that some of these men may still be alive, held against their will, abandoned as prisoners of war by our government for political reasons. On July 24th, 1991, the Board of Supervisors of Hanover County, Virginia, voted unanimously to create a standing committee of private citizens and public officials to promote the live POW MIA issue throughout the country. On November 15, 1991, a public forum was held in Hanover County, and speakers that evening shared compelling evidence about servicemen abandoned following past wars. The video you're about to see is an edited version of that public forum and focuses on those servicemen left behind in Southeast Asia. It's our hope that after you see this video, you'll join with us to promote this issue in your locality to help bring these men home before it's too late. After the speakers' presentations, we'll offer suggestions as to how you can join with us to effect their return home. And now we bring you the Honorable William Hendon, former Congressman from North Carolina, and Mrs. Shelby Robertson Quast, daughter of Colonel John Robertson, still believed to be captive in Southeast Asia.
And now it's my very great pleasure to introduce to you the Honorable William Hendon, former Congressman from North Carolina, and a leading spokesman on behalf of American POWs in Vietnam who are held captive in communist countries. Mr. Hendon has traveled extensively abroad, 25 trips to Southeast Asia, and I believe that you will agree with me that he is indeed an expert on this matter. And therefore, I'd like to give you the Honorable William Hendon.
Yeah. Friends, thank you so much, and thank you for coming. Friday nights are special, family nights, sports nights, whatever, and it's great that you came. I'm honored to be invited. I'm tickled to be here. I believe when we all leave tonight, you will agree with me that half a world away, it's now 7 minutes till 8 tomorrow morning. Our brothers, our countrymen, are suffering in communist captivity, and I hope we'll all be renewed in our efforts to try to get them home. That's what it's all about, getting them home. In 1980, actually it was 79, I was a businessman in western North Carolina in the Great Smokies in Asheville, and hostages were taken in Iran. Where's Tehran? Who knows? But they got our guys, and they're marching them around with rags over their eyes at gunpoint, and they're burning our flag, and they got the Marines, and my goodness. And I said, my goodness, something's terribly wrong here, and I want to try to help. And though I'd never run for anything in my life, I went out and ran for Congress and was fortunate enough to win. Citizen involvement, if you will. Bob Westbrook, not long ago, after hearing stories about American prisoners of war in desperate straits, what can he do about it down here, not up in Washington, not in Southeast Asia? He has a dental practice. He's a professional man. He has very little time. He kind of does what I do and you do in your community, kind of says, look, something's terribly wrong here, and I'm going to try to fix it. And I think it's a great tribute that this many people are here, that the county government has gone along and done all they have done, and everybody's pitched in to make this the success that I'm sure it will be. And I would say on behalf of the families of missing servicemen that we represent at the POW Publicity Fund, to Dr. Bob Westbrook. 3 cheers, Bob. Thank you very much. I hope this This microphone does not create any problems for anybody. Is this in the wrong spot? I'm afraid it's in the right spot for me. How could it be that American citizens are in this auditorium in 1991 talking about prisoners of war in Southeast Asia? How could that possibly be? Is this UFOs and the Loch Ness Monster and Bigfoot? Not at all. I believe by looking at the history, we can show that we left them, why they continue to hold them, what this government is not doing to get them out, and perhaps what we can do collectively and individually to help effect their release. To do this, you have to look at the history. And I used to teach school at the University of Tennessee before I went back to Asheville, and I apologize if it's but this is a school. And rather than saying things and not being able to back them up, we operate from intelligence documents and historical documents. And although I will whip through these, I hope fast enough for Bob and the committee, I do want you to see with your own eyes the things that I have seen, as many as can be made available publicly, and all the documents here that are intelligence documents have been legally acquired and declassified and sanitized. But I think it's important for you to see it. We'll move very rapidly from 1973 to 1991. We're here because of the Paris Peace Accords. Many American POWs came home and the war ended because of the Paris Peace Accords. But we're here talking about POWs because of the Paris Peace Accords signed in 1973 in January in Paris. Negotiated by Henry Kissinger, initialed by him, signed by Secretary Rogers. Here's what it says. The Paris Peace Accords requires the Vietnamese in Article 8 to give us our POWs back. It requires the United States, I'll just read it very carefully because this is the foundation for the entire issue, in my opinion. The United States of America anticipates that this agreement will usher in an era of reconciliation with Vietnam and all the peoples of Indochina, the treaty reads. In pursuance with its traditional policies, the United States will contribute to healing the wounds of war and to post-war reconstruction in Vietnam and throughout Indochina. The Vietnamese said, we want to know exactly what you're going to do under that treaty before we give you the prisoners back, Henry Kissinger. So Kissinger drew up and hand-delivered to Pham Van Dong in Paris, from Paris, he took it to Hanoi, February 1973, February 1. And he said, I want you to know, the president does, because this is on White House stationery, that we'll pay you unconditionally $3,250 million over 5 years to rebuild the war damage that we caused during the war without any political conditions, Nixon said. Further, he said, we will give you an additional $1 to $1.5 billion, that's billion, depending upon how hungry your countrymen are. On White House stationery, signed by Nixon, confirming the treaty that was signed by our Secretary of State, we're going to give you, they said, $4,750 million after we've lost 58,000 killed, 300,000 or 400,000 wounded, and our country torn completely apart by its most unpopular war since the Civil War. There was no question, really, what we were going to do. The headline says it all. U.S. and Hanoi plan to rebuild Vietnam with U.S. dollars. The White House announced today. The Secretary of State, the headline says it all. Imagine this happening today. It couldn't happen today, but it happened after this most divisive of wars. The Secretary of State said, let's have pride at home and let's rebuild North Vietnam. I don't know what they were thinking, but that's the treaty and that's what they said. Nixon's critics said this guy Nixon, he's going to take it out of Social Security and give it to the Vietnamese. And Nixon said, no, not at all. I'll take it out of unexpended funds, he said, from Department of Defense. The war's over, so rather than spend the money on the war, we will give it to them to rebuild their country. But the grassroots, if you will, Main Street America said, no, that doesn't sound too good. And Congress reflected those feelings, and really, this is why we're here tonight, because Congress said, this is not going to work back on Main Street in the small communities of America. Secretary Rogers 3 times went to Capitol Hill, this article says, and called for restraint by members of Congress in making adverse comments about this aid, he said, at least until all American troops are out of Vietnam and all American prisoners are released. He went on to say, according to news accounts at the time, he refused to rule out reconstruction aid to North Vietnam by presidential order if Congress failed to appropriate the funds. He and the president said, in effect, if this won't play back home, we'll do it through another unappropriated fund because this is important. But then the prisoners started coming back. You remember Senator Denton, former Senator Denton, getting off the plane at Clark Field, the emotion-packed weeks there where load after load, plane load came out of Hanoi. And what did they tell? The headline says it all. They were tortured horribly. And the torture stories dampened chances of Hanoi aid. Of course it did. And Senator this and Congressman that, well, listen to this. Representative Joel T. Broyhill of Virginia, he said, and I'll bet he echoed the feelings of every constituent he had. He said, listen, these torture stories convince me that not a cent of American aid money should be spent on rehabilitating a country run by savages. That was the feeling on Main Street. So here's the president. And if you can see this cartoon, I hope you can. There's President Nixon, the Vietnamese dragging up a brutalized American prisoner. And this was in the Washington Post at the time. And the caption is, well, Mr. Nixon, there's the last of the prisoners. Now, where's all the money to rebuild North Vietnam? Imagine. That's not going to work. What does Nixon do? Well, the Senate decided for him. They said, look, we don't care about this treaty. We're out of this war, and you're not going to get, Mr. President, a penny. April 7, 1973, the Senate votes no aid to North Vietnam unless they okay it. It's quite a story if you go back and look. They made the deal. Congress wouldn't give them the money. They cut it off completely. The geography of Southeast Asia is Vietnam, as most people know. It used to be North Vietnam and South, and the South fell, and it's now just Vietnam. Next door, the country of Laos, here, west of Vietnam, and then Cambodia, down on the Gulf of Thailand. Vietnam, we left in 1973. The country fell in 1975 in April. Cambodia fell to the communists in April, and Laos fell totally in December of 1975. What about Laos? It's the secret war, if you will, that went on there. There was a peace accord where the Laos said, look, we take note of what the United States said that it would do to rebuild Vietnam, and we want to talk to you about rebuilding in Laos. We expected to have prisoners come back from Laos. At the time of the Paris Peace Accords, this article simply says, the State Department said, we firmly expect to have a list to cover Laos because there were several hundred pilots lost and known to have survived their shoot-downs. Congressman Sonny Montgomery, who's the chairman of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, asked in this article about the same time, where are these 311 pilots that are lost in Laos? I think the headline says it all. Reds failed to list POWs taken in Laos. While the men were coming out by plane loads from Hanoi, nobody was coming out of Laos. We knew from our intelligence during the war that there was a list. Here the Lao are talking about having lists of prisoners. They talk about in the intelligence, again, during the war, that look, they are kept in areas where they were shot down, and they were shot down all over the Ho Chi Minh Trail area of Laos. They were not taken to Vietnam, as some have thought. No, if they were shot down in Laos, they are held in this country, they told U.S. intelligence. During the war, they boasted of having prisoners. Yes, we have many prisoners in the caves in northern Laos. They put out bulletins. U.S. intelligence picked them up. Bulletins of the Pathet Lao Weekly Bulletin containing photographs and details of American prisoners captured by the Pathet Lao. My goodness, our intelligence, again, during the war, and we're going to talk about after the war, that's what's important, but during the war, CIA had confirmed prisons all over Laos, and you can see here, American prisoners, American pilots, American pilots, American pilots in a cave, American prisoners, 15 American prisoners in a cave. Confirmed prisons with our guys in them. We knew so much about those prisons, it was incredible. Here's an intelligence report received just as the war ended. This guy's talking about being in this cave prison with Americans. Listen to what he says. The detail is incredible. Well, it was 220 volt power to the cave lighting, and there was a telephone at the cave which was connected directly to the intelligence office of the Pathet Lao, and the telephone switchboard in the cave was extension 220. We even knew the phone number, all right, in the prison. Plus he goes on to talk about the American pilots that were there and some captured Thai. After the war, while our prisoners were coming out of Vietnam, the Pathet Lao, in one of the most incredible documents we'll see, they went to the press and said the following: we are holding a number of American prisoners of war. They will be released after a ceasefire goes into effect in Laos. We hold them in Laos. We will not return them until there is a ceasefire, they said. So during the war, our intelligence and their statements and captured documents indicated clearly they had our guys, and we knew they had them. After the war was over, they said, we've got them, and we're going to give them back when there's a ceasefire. The headline in the Washington Post is chilling. Pathet Lao say, no truce, no American POWs. We never got one man back from Laos. That's why we're here tonight, and we're going to talk more about Vietnam. But here they are boasting in the press 3.5 weeks after the war is over. We've got American POWs, and the Washington Post headline, Pathet Lao says, no truce, no American POWs. And gentlemen, we never got one guy back from Laos. We were correctly afraid, as the headline said, that they're going to hold them back to be used as pawns in the continuing struggle in Indochina. U.S. sources indicate at least 100 may still be alive. We knew they were. The Lao said they had them. The Vietnamese said, look, the Lao have told us, as we're releasing the American prisoners from Hanoi, the Lao have told us that the American POWs they hold will be released and that they are making preparations to release them. That's what they told us on the 27th of March, 1973. Again, the State Department knew they had them, DOD knew they had them, the CIA knew they had them, they publicly said they had them, all the documents indicated they had them, they put out pictures of them holding them, we knew where the prisons were, the Vietnamese said that the Lao said they were going to give them back. And 18 days later, we said, they're all dead. Bear with me a minute. This is important. This is why we're here tonight. Because we said they're all dead. They didn't. You've seen the documents. How could this be? How could this happen even in the most divisive of times as Vietnam or post-Vietnam was? I think you don't have to be real conspiratorial to look and see that the Senate, if you recall, voted no aid to North Vietnam on April the 7th, and on April the 14th, we pulled the trigger on our guys. I submit, and I think a reasonable man would come to this conclusion, that they had them, we knew it, we couldn't get the money, and we said, they're all dead. Now, as if that isn't enough, then we began covering it up. Telegram, I hope you can see this in the back. I hope you can see it in the front. I hope you can see it. I hope the lights are right where you can see these things. Declassified State Department telegram. It tells about a guy who comes into Saigon after all American troops have gone and the war's over and all the POWs are home, and President Nixon says, all Americans are home, all the POWs are home, there are none left alive. And the Pentagon rules all of them dead, and this guy comes in and says, wait a minute, I saw 8 Americans. I know they were Americans. So-and-so came to this news conference and said that, no, excuse me, 6 Americans. They were Americans. They were American prisoners. The American officer at the news conference requested the news services to play down details of the man's account. So-and-so, AP was consistent with embargo requests, while UPI and NBC, after talk with embassy press officer, omitted the item entirely from their stories. Don't talk about it. Don't talk about it, because the policy is these men are all dead. Word got around, though, as it does in Washington and anywhere, that there's a secret deal, that Nixon cut a secret deal with the Vietnamese to rebuild their country. Not only the treaty, which we know was public from the newspaper accounts, but a secret letter saying for sure we'd give them the money unconditionally. To get to the bottom of it, Congress created the Montgomery Commission, headed by Congressman Montgomery. And they went to Secretary Kissinger and said, what's the deal about this secret letter? He said, there is no secret letter. And they said, will you come before our committee and testify? And Kissinger said, no, I won't come before your committee, and I will not take the oath. That's enough for me, but again, the letter at that point was secret even from our own people and our own government. So off the committee went to Hanoi to try to determine, are any American prisoners left behind, still alive, and if so, what do they want for them? This secret deal that we've heard about. It's almost unbelievable to go back through the Montgomery Commission hearings, because they flew to Hanoi to find out what was going on, and they got over there and the Vietnamese said, where's our $3.25 billion? And Montgomery said, what are you talking about? And the Vietnamese said, we've got a letter here from President Nixon on White House stationery saying that you'll give us the money. And the Montgomery Commission said, as you'll see right here in the files from the Montgomery Commission, this is a great surprise to us. We didn't know this. We weren't told by our own government that this existed. So they came back embarrassed, and they asked for the document under, they asked the White House for it, and it was denied. And to go through these hearings and to see the lies and the duplicity that the White House perpetrated on Capitol Hill, my goodness, we won't spend much time on it, but the Assistant Secretary of State says, let me answer this question very specifically. There was no agreement. There is no agreement. There never was an agreement with the Vietnamese. And they said, well, the Vietnamese says there's this letter from Nixon. And he said, hey, that's not an agreement. There is no agreement. There is no agreement. There is no agreement or secret memorandum. I mean, just lying like the rug lies right here on the floor of this arena. It's unbelievable the way they do things in Washington. The Vietnamese, however, wrote back, they just wrote to Congress and said, look, any information on the missing in action is contingent, linked to you paying us that money. And we're going to be through this in about 1 minute, but this, again, is a big part of what we're talking about. the Vietnamese, in spite of America saying they're all dead, wrote to Congress and said, if you want to know about them, you got to pay us that money that you promised us. The committee, however, heard the Secretary of State in its final hearing. Speaking for the Secretary of State, the Assistant Secretary of State, Phil Habib, said, we are not going to bargain with the Vietnamese. And the committee, in the absence of any other, well, here's the way they said it, short of recommencing the war, there are few alternatives left to America. In other words, we're not going to bargain, we're not going to pay, we're not going back to war. So the committee ruled just about this time in 1976, they're all dead. There is no evidence that they're there. So you got the Pentagon saying they're dead. Now you got a congressional commission saying they're dead. And then Jimmy Carter comes to town, new president, wants to turn the book, turn the page, close the book, throw the book away on Vietnam, and appoints Leonard Woodcock, the former director of the United Auto Workers, to find out once and for all. Pentagon had said they were dead. Sonny Montgomery's commission said they were dead. Now what about a presidentially appointed commission to once and for all settle this issue so we can move on? Woodcock goes to Hanoi. The Vietnamese tell him, we're not going to tell you anything about POWs until you pay us the money. He goes to Laos. The Lao tell him straight up, it's in the record. The Lao made it clear to the commission that the MIA issue is linked to U.S. assistance. Anything we're going to tell you after we've been paid, they said. But Woodcock said in his final report, there's no reason for them to hold them. We can't figure out why they would do it. And we rule unequivocally that all Americans are dead. So that's as much of the history, I'm sure, as most of us can take. But I hope you'll agree it's important as a foundation. It's clear they had them after the war and said, we'll give them back when we get a fair deal. We said, no, you don't have them. They're all dead. And the Pentagon, the Montgomery Commission, and the Woodcock Commission in early 1977, all three said there are no American prisoners of war. And at that point, America went on with its life. But then came the boat people. And holy moly, what they told about Americans. I saw them. There were so many Americans being marched down a rural road. I saw them. There were 20 American POWs in a truck. They were chained together in pairs wearing striped uniforms. They were sick or injured. I was a doctor during the war. I took care of Americans. I know these guys were Americans because I know what Americans look like. They were badly injured. They were sick. The Vietnamese didn't return them, this man told U.S. intelligence, because they were embarrassed about how it would look. They were war wounded, and some had broken under torture. They didn't release them, another man said, because they didn't want to be embarrassed. There were over 100 in what we call mobile detention, he told U.S. intelligence, being moved from camp to camp. Mobile detention was a new word. But then this guy comes in and says, well, we didn't call it mobile detention, but I moved with them. I was in the cadre, the South Vietnamese Viet Cong cadre, and we went from camp to camp to camp to camp. They moved them all the time because they were scared the Americans might try to rescue them. This guy said, hey, I was in prison up at Bot Bot, northwest of Saigon on the Red River, northwest of Hanoi, on the Red River. I saw a number of American prisoners there. I was in prison there, and I saw them there. This guy says, gee, that's interesting. I was at Bot Bot, and I saw them there. These guys say, gee, that's interesting. There were 230, this man said, at a prison at Bot Bot. They were all sick and injured. This man says, I'm a doctor. I was a doctor during the war, not the other doctor in the other report. I treated American POWs at Bot Bot in the prison. There were 230 there, but 11 died from illness. So you've got multiple sources saying 230, same prison. Another guy says 230, 5 or 6, 10 or 12, 15 or 20 sources all telling the same thing. We keep them, he said, to bargain. We are always in an advantageous position when we have the Americans. This North Vietnamese leader said, "We have never released all American prisoners of war. We will lose the advantage." This guy told U.S. intelligence that he was told in a camp in 1976, look, the instructor said the Vietnamese are not stupid. They hold these Americans until the $3 billion that they had been promised in aid was received. Congress didn't know about it, but they knew about it in the camps in Vietnam. This guy says, I was going into the prison in Haiphong, the big prison. I was walking by it and I saw Americans being taken in a covered Jeep. 3 months later, this guy says, I was in the prison. I don't know about the guy who saw him coming in, but I was in there. I was a prisoner. And yes, they were there. The Americans were there. I saw them repeatedly. And the guards told me, those are American pilots, and we keep them because they are worth, as it says here in the report, 2 to 3 factories. So we keep the American pilots for trade. The man continued to say that the U.S. leaders had signed an agreement in Paris to provide reconstruction aid to Vietnam when the POWs were returned. However, when some POWs were returned, there was no aid, so they continued to hold these POWs, the ones that I, sir, saw, he told U.S. intelligence. My brother had access to the POWs. He said, we keep these people in order to put pressure on the U.S. government to get payment for war damage and the country's reconstruction. I saw them. They were in a field. I walked among them. They had on prisoner clothing, she said. I saw him. It was Christmas time, 1977. He told me his name was Captain Patrick. He was very thin, sick. He said, if you can ever get out of here, please tell my country about me. I was taking food, she said, to my husband in re-education. He was a South Vietnamese general, and after the war they threw him in prison. And just as I got to the camp, I saw 30 Americans working beside the road. And the Americans spoke to one another very loudly so I would overhear. And they said, there are 30 Americans kept here. We all need food. Please bring us food and the American government will reward you. I was an electrician working in the mines north of Hanoi. There are 70 to 80 American prisoners there, I know. I saw them. There's a large number in a camp near the Chinese border. The Taiwanese commandos saw them repeatedly, and they escaped after the Chinese invasion in '79 and told their story. The Americans were a sorry, sad-looking group, dressed in red, dark red, and light gray striped pajamas. The Taiwanese said that the Americans repeatedly requested whoever could get out of prison and out of Vietnam, please report to the United States government about them. He looked like that. 2 different sources said, who identified him by name. His name is Bolik, they said. He's chained to a ring in the floor of the darkened big cell in Rockshaw in the old French prison. 2 different people reported it. 4 people corroborated it. These 2 knew his name. There is a Bolik missing. He was lost just close by. Now, they looked like this at our prison. They had them hobbled, shackled, bound, so they couldn't escape, he told U.S. intelligence. Who are these people? Can we identify them? This guy looks into an adjacent tent after he's been captured, this South Vietnamese, and he said, I looked into the flap and I could see 3 American prisoners. And one of them tried to communicate with me, he told CIA, by reaching out with his foot and writing with his toe in the sand. If you can see this report, you'll know it says, first he drew a W, then an I, then an L or a V. I couldn't be sure because he got scared when the guard saw him and pulled his foot back in. Wilson? Williams? Who knows? Who are these guys? Well, the guard said, who cleaned out their cells on a daily basis and then became a boat person and came and told U.S. intelligence. I don't know who they were. Because we didn't call them by name, we just called them by rank and by cell. There was a captain in room 5, a major in room 25, a major in room 40, a first lieutenant in 35, 20, and 16. There were 49 Americans in that camp. I know I cleaned out their cells, and several died. In May 78, the man in room 22 died, and we wrapped him in a mat and buried him in the jungle. Who are they? The escaping guard from Muang Et prison, known prison facility in Laos, comes out and says, hey, I've been guarding American POWs, and one of them's name is Armstrong. Oh yeah, you can show me all those pictures, but I was guarding Armstrong. There are 2 Armstrongs lost in Laos. The American prisoners were held in a cave. I was told by my guards they are American pilots. They were quite tall. They wore pieces of car tires tied to their feet for shoes. Is this guy lying? I don't think so. Passed 2 polygraphs indicating that he was telling the truth. Let me tell you, U.S. government, what I have seen, he said. I was a bus driver. My bus was commandeered by a prison camp commander. He made me take stolen goods to his prison camp, and he got a little tipsy after dinner, made me put on guard clothes, and he took me around his prison and boasted of what was there. This is what I have seen at Song La, he said. And we got enough reports from Song La prison, 1 for every person in this room, just about. I put on the Bowdoin uniform. They were apprehensive. I saw the prisoners were Americans. They didn't know what I was doing. I looked at them. They were in a sorry state, very thin, very pale. Their clothes were faded brown color. They ate part rice and part sorghum, the kind previously used, he says, to feed the hogs. My 2 sons are guards at the cave prison at kilometer 7 road marker stone, near Route 6 and 7 northeast of Phonsavan in Sin Quan province, Laos. They're Americans in the prison. 7 Thai, 6 Americans. The Americans are taken outside, my sons tell me, she said to U.S. intelligence, every Saturday for exercise. Finally, in 1979, here comes an American out of Vietnam. The Vietnamese have said there are no Americans there. They've denied there are any Americans of any type there. And here comes Robert Garwood, the Marine. Was he a collaborator? I don't know. Did he defect? I don't know. But I do know this. Robert Garwood told, during his court-martial proceedings in 1981, he told the court that there were several hundred American POWs still there, and he knew it because he had seen them. And if you can read it, after listening to the testimony, the presiding judge ruled that Garwood's statements about POWs remaining in Vietnam were irrelevant and should be stricken from the record and disregarded by the jurors. Had nothing to do, the judge said, with the proceedings. My goodness. But an awful lot to do with men suffering half a world away. Nobody was listening. Vietnam was a bad dream. But, and I don't mean this in any partisan way, but I had great affection for Ronald Reagan. I worked very closely with him, trying to get these men out. Just at the very time the Garwood testimony was going on and these reports continued to pour out, here comes Ronald Reagan to town, the new president. And right off the bat, as you would expect, Reagan sends in a team to try to get the final fix on some very good intelligence we had on a camp in central Laos. He was going to get them out, for sure. He wasn't going to put up with it anymore. Unfortunately, the deal didn't work. It's a long story why it didn't work, but it was very good intelligence. I was not involved in the raid at all, but heavily briefed on it because I was on the POW task force. And hey, the whole front page of the Washington Post, spring 1981, doesn't say we got them. It says mercenaries sent into Laos seeking MIAs, and it failed. And if you remember the political winds at the time, the reason Ronald Reagan came to town was because of a hostage rescue attempt that went bad in the desert in Iran. It sent President Carter with a one-way ticket straight back to Georgia. The American people don't like failure. And though Reagan came to town because of a failed attempt, he tried one and it failed, and it absolutely scared the political people in the White House and all over to death. And it became apparent that there would be no more rescues. Bad news. Failed rescues hurt presidents. So the Director of Defense Intelligence, very quickly, and I and another congressman, we got together and we said, look, there are not going to be any more rescues. We're going to have to do something else. And with the president's approval, I began traveling into Laos, and the president was trying to buy them out, straight up. Just like the Iran-Contra deal, though it wasn't tow missiles to the Ayatollah, it was medical supplies for POW. I went 6 times into Laos secretly doing this deal. There's some pictures up on the plated jars and stuff with the Lao officials up there. It was a neat deal. Our target, guy I dealt with, Dr. Ponmek Dalaloy, the Vice Minister of Public Health, known to U.S. intelligence to be the doctor who's taken care of the prisoners in Laos. The prisoners that, again, they acknowledged they had. Intelligence continues to show up until the early 80s, and of course way on. We're talking about the early 80s now. Intelligence continued to show that they were there, and that this guy, that guy, is the one that takes care of them. And we were doing a deal. It really, the president thought it was going to work, Bud McFarlane thought it was going to work, National Security Advisor Bill Clark thought it was going to work. I thought it was going to work. But as well, the National Security Council guys all thought it was going to work. But boom, it got in the press in February of 1983. The headline says it all. POW search in Laos, U.S. role revealed, and it says not all the whole truth, but basically it says a conservative Republican president is trying to buy hostages back from a hostile communist power. And if you think the failed rescue attempt scared them, this scared the guys in the White House and in, if you will, the Republican Party to death. Because who was this guy Reagan? He was a new president. He was a great guy, everybody thought, and going to get the country back on track. And here he is over in Asia running failed rescues and doing ransom deals for POWs. And I hope you can see this cartoon because it says it all. Ronald Reagan with the Pentagon guy on the left and the politicians on the right, and they're telling him, it's nothing, sir, just an old can of worms. And if you can see the cartoon in the can of worms, one of our guys. And that is what happened, friends. Reagan tried to snatch them. He tried to buy them. And when both deals went bad, stay away from it, Mr. President. And that's what happened. Quickly, the intelligence kept coming out. In 1982, Vietnamese Viet Cong official defects, they got them. There are 20 American pilots again at Song La. The guy said, my brother works there. I saw them at Ha Ba Trung Street in a metal-covered Jeep, the prisoners in the prison at Ha Ba Trung Street in downtown Hanoi in October 1983. There were U.S. servicemen, 32 old and handicapped prisoners, he told U.S. intelligence, being held in Laos, 1983. 1984, here's who they are. Major Winfield Sisson, Colonel Charles Shelton, Major James Jefferson, Captain George McDonald, Lieutenant Colonel McDonald, Captain Dennis Pugh, he told U.S. intelligence, are still there, and they're all missing, and the names all match. I run a prison, and I'm willing to sell them back for the boats that it will take to get here on this island and get us off, and get me and my garrison, my guards, to France. We don't want to come to America, the captain said. But there are 184 Americans in this prison, and for $400,000 and a boat to get us out over here to Thailand and off to France, you can have these guys. We want out. We said, no, we don't pay. And we ran reconnaissance on this island, and believe you me, it's as secure as Fort Knox. But nope, we don't pay. There was so much intelligence that Bud McFarlane, the National Security Advisor, got taped, imagine this, telling the truth in 1985. Wall Street Journal, USA Today. McFarlane says there is quite a lot of evidence given by people who have no ulterior motives and no reason to lie, and they are telling what they have seen. They have to be there. Well, of course, we all knew it. But the president's hands were tied by his failed efforts to try to get them out. I went to President Reagan, and Senator Smith and I did, Vice President Bush, in 1986. And I said, Mr. President, we've got to do something. We know what you've been through. We've got to do something. Bring General Ty, the former Director of Defense Intelligence, back in from retirement, and let's look at this thing one more time. The President did. And here's the report, September 30th, 1986. If you can read the headline, POWs alive in Vietnam, report concludes. It concluded nothing else. A Pentagon panel, after a 5-month review of the nation's classified intelligence files, has concluded that American prisoners of war are still alive in Southeast Asia. The number could be at least 100 men. No question. But guess what happened then? 30 days after this report, which we worked so hard to get out, because we knew what the intelligence was, and finally here this esteemed general officer comes back from retirement and makes that statement. 30 days later, Iran-Contra blows up. Ollie North's caught in the Middle East doing these deals, tow missiles, and hey, it was over. The president almost lost his presidency over a failed effort to get hostages. And this issue wasn't moved to the back burner, it was moved completely out of the building, nowhere near the stove. They were consumed by Iran-Contra. But the intelligence didn't stop. 50 Americans bathing in a river with guards holding guns on them in Song La province. Morgan Donahue and 5 others at the Baitung Mountain Prison in Con Thuet in Laos in 1987. Donahue and Stevenson held at the Bulafa District Prison in August of 1987. Stevenson, according to this document, is not doing well. Stevenson has made 2 unsuccessful escape attempts, according to the guard, as he told U.S. intelligence, and because of the escape attempts, he has been given an injection of brainwashing drugs to keep him from escaping, and his memory, according to the intelligence report, is now gone. 1988. U.S. intelligence learns that Tommy Hart, Eddie Mercer, Joe Birch, Jim Fuller, and Morgan Donahue are apparently held at map coordinates XD 6537. And the government acknowledges in the report all names cross-checked with valid MIA cases. Of course they do. They're all missing, shoots from all their planes, and this guy comes out and says in 1988, they're there. Where? Here. Just in from Khe Sanh at the Lao-Vietnam border on Route 9. Perhaps some of y'all were there at Khe Sanh. At a place called Ban Hui San. That's not enough. They're in buildings apparently 2 and 3, 6 kilometers north of Route 9. next to the radar station. 5 names of 5 men who are missing. Shoots from their plane. This resistance fighter says they're alive. They're in that prison. There are the map coordinates, and there's a drawing of the camp. You can't miss it. Vietnam and Laos, they know what the deal is. MIA search linked to 1973's Paris Peace Accords. They haven't forgotten. More U.S. money, and we'll look for the MIAs. They tell General Vesey, we don't have them, but as they told our congressional delegation in 1986, they may be out here in the bushes. Obviously, the Vietnamese and the Lao need a way out of this thing. There's what they've chosen. They tell us, we don't hold prisoners, but they may be out in the wild areas. This country's very wild, Congressman or General. They've said it to me. And hey, if you don't pay, they told the U.S. in 1988, well, there it is. Vietnam drags its heels on MIA issue for want of aid. That's not 73 when they said it the first time. That's 1988. Who is this guy who said that? His name is Nguyen Co Thach, the former foreign minister of Vietnam. There he is, standing right beside Henry Kissinger's ear at the Paris Peace Accords. He was there with Kissinger when the deal was cut. So when he says 15 years later, we're dragging our heels on the MIAs for want of aid, he knows what he's talking about. The Lao, they're a little more direct. Look at this headline, 1988, May 15, 1988, not 78, not 73, May 88. Laos wants aid in return for missing soldiers. The United States should give Laos humanitarian aid if it wants the country to account for Americans missing in the Indochina War, a senior government official said Saturday. There's no question. So what do? You got a Pentagon panel saying they're there. You got the Lao and the Vietnamese dangling them out and saying, pay us and you'll get them back. But you got Iran-Contra stopping the president from doing anything. We all got together and said, look, me and a bunch of buddies of mine in Congress, I lost the election in '86, and we said, look, all the pilots flew into combat with this in their flight suit. You pilots here know what this is. Many people don't, though. It's called a blood chit. Okay, C-H-I-T, blood chit. I don't know what the origin of the phrase is, but this is black and white, if you will, of the silk color. And in 15, 18 languages it says, well, I'll read you what it says. I'm a citizen of the United States of America. This pilot has this in his flight suit after he shot down. I don't speak your language. Misfortune forces me to seek your assistance in obtaining food, shelter, and protection. That's a bureaucratic way of saying, you guys shot me down, and I'm here, and take care of me. Please take me to someone who will provide for my safety and see that I am returned to my people. Last sentence. My government will reward you. Gold. It's a long-standing tradition. It started with the Flying Tigers in Pacific Theater, or the China-Burma India Theater, excuse me. And hey, it's gone through Korea, it's gone through, and the flyers in the Middle East carry these with them. Okay? Take me back, Saddam Hussein's man, to my lines, and we'll give you gold. We'll pay. Time-honored and an honorable way to maybe get the guys back. We said, look, the government offered that during the war, but won't pay it anymore. And the government can't get these guys out or won't get them out, so we, me and my friends in Congress that I used to serve with, I just lost the election, as I said, we said, look, let's do that kind of privately. I'm good for $100,000 and got 21 other guys in Congress and some private citizens, Captain Red McDaniel, former POW, others. We said, look, we're each good for $100,000 and we'll pay collectively $2.5 million as a reward to anybody who will bring one of these guys out. And we got a lot of publicity here in the States. It was great. We started off with $1 million, okay, just 10 guys. And a lot of publicity all over the country. Here are these congressmen, seated congressmen, that's me in the background, We'll pay $1 million in this case. We'll pay $1 million, the first 10 guys said, to anybody who'll bring one out. We'll do it ourselves. The government ought to do it. The government won't do it or can't do it, so we'll do it. The Vietnamese just howled. We loved it. They said, oh, this is the worst thing in the world, big international incident. What are these American politicians doing? It makes us very angry, they said. The Laos said the same thing. What are these guys doing? It was so great that a whole bunch more guys piled on the congressmen. They said, we want to be a part of this thing. Okay? It looks like it's working in Asia. So $2.5 million is what we will pay, not to Rambo to go get them, but to anybody who will escape or defect and bring one out. The guard, the drug runner, the people that take food to the camps, the helicopter pilot, we don't care who it is, the Politburo member. Bring an American POW to freedom, you make him a free man, we'll make you a rich man. That's our message. Now, Beth Stewart, who's here, she's vice chairman of the POW Publicity Fund, our organization. Her father's missing over Dien Bien Phu. Along with other family members, we go over to Thailand to float balloons into Laos so we can get the reward posters in there. The reward posters are kind of neat. It's a picture of the congressman and the money in Vietnamese language and a cartoon. And the cartoon simply says this. It says, look, here's a soldier, there's an American pilot. You, sir, bring the American to freedom, bring him across the border in a boat, and we'll give you gold. And we go over, and we hand these things out everywhere we can. We try to float the balloons. They won't let us, so we throw them in Ziploc bags in the Mekong River, and they float down these little reward posters to tell people, we know they're there, bring them out, you'll get rich. The word comes out. We get letters. Hey, they're interested in these reward posters. They're interested in the reward. U.S. intelligence picks it up. This is Christmas 87. There's a big reward being offered for the return of American prisoners, this guy reports, and so urged my cooperation in trying to get some out. We were heartened by that, and I've spent untold hours, as have the families of our organization, going up and down the Mekong River, where they come across from Laos, from communist Laos, on one-day passes to shop, and we hand them reward posters, and they go back over and hopefully pass the word. We rent a boat in Hong Kong. The headline says it all. Ship leaves for Vietnam with $2.5 million reward. We go off the coast of Vietnam, not real close, we don't need to, because the winds carry these huge balloons. I got one with me here. And off they go. And hey, the headline says balloons carry POW, that's USA Today. We got this in Hong Kong that very day when we came back. Balloons carry POW reward offer. In the press over there, again, the Chinese press, whatever, a lot of interest. And the headline, of course, I said it, I wanted to say it because I believe that Hendon confident POW balloons will reach targets in Vietnam. We were confident because we calculated the winds and all this stuff. But hey, didn't matter because British Broadcasting, BBC, and Voice of America, and everybody else is covering what we're doing and beaming in the native language into the camps, the very camps where these men are said to be, that these kids are out here in the South China Sea floating balloons in and will pay $2.5 million for anybody who'll bring one out. Here's where it gets real sticky. We had intelligence, which I don't want to get into, but trust me, that's it, of a large camp in Attapeu Province, Laos, the tri-border area, southern Laos, Attapeu Province. You veterans know where it is, right at the tri-border. We knew about this camp. U.S. intelligence knew about this camp. It was said to hold 250 to 300 American and Thai prisoners from an unimpeachable source. So we were working all up and down the Mekong, but we particularly were attracted to Attapeu Province, Laos. In 1988, November, this report came out. And this guy says, there are 260 Americans in a cave prison in Attapeu Province, Laos. Now, we've got the map coordinates, the name of the town, the whole deal. This guy doesn't say exactly the town, but it's got to be the same place. It's kind of like saying, New York City. I mean, it's big and everybody knows in the area knows where it is. So this guy says, I got relatives that work in this camp, and we want to bring some American prisoners out for this reward we've heard about. And wow, are we ever excited about that? Until we look at page 2, sent to us by someone in the government who was honest. And here's what they told him. The guy met with U.S. intelligence, said, I can get them out of this big prison. U.S. intelligence already knew about the prison. And the guy said, I want the reward I've heard about from the document. Source stated he was willing to cooperate, but insisted on knowing the terms of the $2.5 million reward he had heard about in the news recently. U.S. representative explained that the U.S. government is not offering a reward and does not support the private group that is advertising the reward. Further, U.S. representative pointed out that many people have been inquiring recently about this reward, but cautioned the source, don't be too quick to believe every rumor you hear. Think about that. The U.S. government offers a reward, the blood chit. They renege on it. They won't pay it after the war. We come up with the money. We go over there and advertise it. The guy comes out from the known prison camp and says we can bring him out, and the U.S. government tells him don't do it. And I went to the U.S. government and confronted them, and they said that's exactly what we told them. And Mary and Joe Milner over in Kentucky, Joe spent 2.5 years courtesy of the German government in Stalag Luft 3, I think, or 17, as a prisoner of war, bailing out over Germany. Joe Milner's son shows up in October 1989. He's been missing since 71, a Cobra gunship pilot. And they come to the border and say, Billy Milner's alive and we can bring him out for this reward. And the U.S. government told the guy, go back. There isn't any reward. And they told the Milners after we contacted them, that's exactly what we told them. We're amazed. U.S. government offers $500,000 reward in Athens embassy killing. U.S. government pays $800,000 reward for a defecting communist official in Central America. U.S. government pays a bounty for the guy who killed DEA agent Kiki Camarena, and they should have paid it. U.S. government pays $4 million reward for anti-terrorist pool, and they should have. My goodness. The U.S. government will even pay $1 million for this monster as a reward to find him. But when it comes to paying, no. When it comes to allowing a former member of Congress and 21 current and former members of Congress to pay the money for this guy, that's David Herdlicka, who was shot down and is clearly in captivity in Laos and never came back. Nobody did. When we have the opportunity to pay the reward, they tell them, don't do it. There is no reward, even though we know where the camps are and we know who the people are that they're trying to bring out. It's no wonder, friends, that Colonel Peck says, U.S. effort a charade, a travesty. This is the former head of the U.S. POW office in the Pentagon. It's no wonder, and Tracy Ussery, a fine investigator and a heck of a guy, will be here in just a minute to tell you about the Senate Foreign Relations Committee report that said government leaves MIAs to rot in prison. It's no wonder the headlines say that when they tell them, go back, don't rescue them. The families of the POW Publicity Fund have tried, and we're very proud of it, to court-martial. That's all we can do. We keep publicizing the reward and try to court-martial the U.S. officials who were telling them not to rescue our men. But the reports kept coming out. Arden Hassinger alive in Laos, 22 February 1989. Arden Hassinger bailed out. We know there were many shoots out of his C-47 gunship on Christmas Eve, 1965. Could he still be alive? I don't know for sure, but this guy says he is alive, cannot get out of Laos, and he's at Bang Nonwatha, which ain't but about 10 miles from where he was shot down. David Herdlicka, you remember the picture a minute ago? Shot down in captivity in 65, the picture just a second ago. He shows up alive at the Kamkuit jail in June 1989. Is he really there? You'll never know until you go to the Kamkuit jail. 90 guys at the Lao-Vietnam border in a known prison facility, not the big one down in Adipu province. U.S. intelligence learns they're there. The guy says, the camp commander told me he wants to move them out of the prison for this reward. They tell him, go back. The famous Japanese monk, held since 75 in various prisons in Vietnam, he comes out and he says, hey, there are still lots of American prisoners. I was last with 6 of them in a prison outside Hanoi on January the 13th, 1989. But what does the U.S. government do in addition to telling them go back and don't rescue them? They appear in public and say, if we look at everything we've collected in intelligence during the war and everything we've collected since the war, we don't find any evidence that Americans are captive. That is the official U.S. government position. What have we been talking about? Those are U.S. intelligence documents. Is that evidence? My goodness. November 1990, 12 in Hua Phan province, Laos. U.S. intelligence. November 1990, 6 Americans in Sin Quan province, Laos, in prison. How do we know? Well, we're not sure, but the freedom fighter said he got the information from his wife, who takes pudding to the guards at the camp and has repeatedly seen these Americans. No evidence? My goodness. November 1990, 16 Americans in the tri-border area of Laos. We talked about the tri-border area. 42 Americans in Vietnam, November 1990. December 1990, U.S. intelligence document. 70 foreign prisoners held in Sarvain province, Laos. March 1991, 4 men in Laos, a known facility, a known area. Names, the names all match. There are so many reports that by July, this is just a graph of the reports over the years. By July 1991, U.S. government had received 1,483 eyewitness accounts, some of which you've seen, plus thousands of accounts like from the woman who took pudding to the guards but didn't escape. Her son did and told what she had told him. Thousands of reports. By July again of this year, 1,500 eyewitness accounts. And our national security advisor goes 2 weeks later in July 27th and says on the front page of the Washington Post, there is no evidence that MIAs are alive. What in the world is going on? Well, that's why we're here. Why are they doing this? We're not sure. These are honorable people. I don't know Brent personally, but I know he's an honorable man. Why is he saying that? Is it because, like NASA did after the shuttle Apollo pad fire in 1967, when the men were trapped and burned alive, we said they never knew what hit them? NASA said, we know that wasn't true, but that's what they said. And when the space shuttle blew up, they told us the same thing. The crew never knew what hit them, but they won't give you the tapes. And those of us who know what went on know full well that those brave astronauts knew what hit them and a whole lot more. But the government somehow just can't level with the American people on things like this. There's an explosion in the number 2 turret on the USS Iowa, and they don't want condemnation for this World War II type technology. So what do? They get this guy, Clay Hardwick, who I'm sure was a fine, patriotic American, because his father served in the Navy and he served in the Navy. And they said this boy was some kind of suicidal, homosexual nut and blew the Iowa up. Give me a break. The first time I saw that, I said, what a joke. What a sham. And I told Senator Grassley from Iowa, I said, if I were you, Senator, I would make them take the Iowa out. They have soiled its name, and every sailor that ever sailed, I'd take the Iowa out off the coast and scuttle it before I would let the integrity of the service and these brave men who died and still serve be impugned by some kind of garbage like that. And of course now the Navy has come back and apologized. What a horrible thing. Why do they do that? I'm not sure why they do it. Why, when things go a little bit wrong, or in this case, terribly wrong during combat, and of course that always happens, during Desert Storm and friendly fire killed our brave men as it did, why do they tell the families, why can't they level with them? Why do they tell them that your son was killed by Iraqi soldiers and medical care was right there with him the entire time? There was no medical care. He was inside a tank that we mistakenly hit, but we couldn't level with these people. I don't understand. Maybe they think in Washington that it's better for America if you just don't level with the American people when the going gets tough. Or is it this, as the Washington Post said about Scowcroft's comments about no evidence? For years there has been a running argument in Washington on whether it is better for negotiating purposes to put a high value on retrieval of hostages, or it's better to devalue them, the Post said. The Scowcroft suggestion that there are no live American MIAs doesn't necessarily mean that the policy is one of official abandonment of the MIAs. Rather, it sends a signal that the United States isn't going to pay. We don't care why he said it, whether it's that reason or embarrassment or whatever. We simply say, hey, it's time to get these brave men home. And at the POW Publicity Fund, it's not just the reward. We study the intelligence and we try to act on it. And in conclusion, this is an article, 3rd of August, 1991. Beth Stewart and I testified. She for the families, me more for me and the families. But someone who knows the intelligence and is proud of it, knows how the government works, knows they're not leveling with the American people, knows they're telling people, go back, don't rescue them, don't bring them out for this reward that these congressmen have offered. Incredible. So we went before Congress, and I challenged Congressman Steve Solars and his entire committee to forego their August junkets and get on a plane with us. Or, better yet, we get on their plane and we fly to Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, and we go look in these camps and see if these reports are true. These men deserve no less. And I told Solars, I want you to read this article. A former congressman yesterday said he had evidence that American MIAs were being held captive in Southeast Asia and challenged members of Congress to go with him to begin freeing them. But Representative Stephen J. Solars of New York, the chairman, denounced as a bizarre publicity stunt. Former Representative Bill Hendon, North Carolina Republican, who testified before Solars' Foreign Affairs Subcommittee on Asia-Pacific Affairs, quote, "In all my years in Congress," Solars said, "this may be the single most outrageous allegation I have ever heard." In effect, Hendon has said the U.S. government knows where American POWs are being held and refuses to do anything about it, Solars said. For a former member of the U.S. Congress to make such a charge borders on blasphemy. Guilty as charged, ladies and gentlemen. Blasphemy? Let's go look in those camps. The blasphemy is to leave these men knowingly and do nothing about it in the 15 years since. Here's what we want, and we'll accept no less. And I'm confident the American people will accept no less based on the intelligence. We want the same thing to happen to some brave or all the brave Americans that served. It happened to this Frenchman who served with the French army in the Indochina War that ended in 1954 with the great French defeat at Dien Bien Phu. This is an article from 1965, January 4, Newsweek magazine. It's interesting. It's what it's all about to us. After the fall of Dien Bien Phu in May 1954, a fresh inscription was chiseled in the gray stone war memorial in the little French town of Plutihane. Lettered in gold, it read, Yves Lebray died for France in Indochina. And on All Saints' Day every year thereafter, someone from the Lebray family joined in placing a wreath beside the plaque honoring Yves and the other heroes of Plutihane who died for France in Indochina. Last week, however, who should be sipping wine in the local cafe but Yves Lebray? A little worse for the wear, but back home. The Vietnamese that had him in forced labor and torture from 1953 when he was captured at Haiphong on patrol until 1965. And the French found out about him and did the deal. And Yves Lebray was back home. Fascinating. Somehow Yves Lebray, the article concludes, manages to be cheated out of even the macabre pleasures of life. When he visited the Plutihane War Memorial shortly after his return, he discovered the plaque bearing his name had already been taken down by the mayor and town officials. It would have made such a nice souvenir for me, Lebray said. Few men get to see their own name on the monument for the dead. Incredible story. We want to see that duplicated at that incredible monument up in Washington. You talk about closing the book and moving on from Vietnam. What about all the Americans, but at least one, back from Southeast Asia through the reward, through responsible government action, however, feeling his name on that magnificent memorial? My goodness, that's the way to close this book, and it will never be closed until that happens. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Mrs. Shelby Robertson Quast, whose father is Colonel John Robertson. The man on the left as you view the photograph of the three that was nationally publicized. It's a great, great honor to have her with us tonight. Please honor Mrs. Quast.
I too want to thank everybody for coming tonight. It's extremely important to get people involved, and I know in the audience I recognize a lot of people who are not involved in this issue because they have to be, but because they chose to be. And I also see some new faces, and it's important that everybody be involved. It just happens to be my father that I'm talking about. When Billy Hendon was showing all of his information, there were hundreds of names. And there are hundreds, literally thousands of cases that could be standing up here and telling you their story. But I know one in particular, and that's the one of my father, Colonel Robertson. The last week I've spent most of the time at the Senate select hearings, and they had the administration testifying, and they had different activists testifying, and they had family members testifying. It's the beginning of trying to get a background of information for this particular Senate Select Committee on POW and MIA affairs. And I heard a lot of extremely interesting things. I heard the administration admit that we left men behind, that we knowingly left men behind. I heard Cheney say there have been a lot of mistakes made. I heard people say that there's a policy out there that families can see all the information with the exception of sources and methods. I heard a Bessie discrepancy case defined as last known alive on the ground. That was very interesting. It's the first time I had that defined. My father's a Bessie discrepancy case, and I had to go to a Senate Select Committee to learn he was last known alive on the ground. But 2 points were most concerning to me. One was, I heard a lot of people under oath say, you know, if Vietnam ever returns live Americans, if we ever find out that they were knowingly holding live Americans, we would never normalize with that country. What a heinous crime that would be. And on the other hand, I hear Ken Quinn and everybody under oath once again saying, well, part of the roadmap to normalization is you have to resolve last known alive discrepancy cases. And I became a little bit concerned about the message we're sending. Resolve the cases, but don't return any live Americans if you want to normalize. And I think that's something that everybody needs to be paying attention to, because I'm a family member and I'm absolutely confused with the message we're sending. I'm wondering what the Vietnamese are thinking. I know that the Senate Select Committee was confused because I kept hearing different senators reiterating different things that they heard. The main point about that really concerns me personally is resolving the discrepancy cases. My father being one of those, they did try to resolve that case. And just today, they had to reopen that case because they closed it without any evidence. I think what we're doing is we're forcing the Vietnamese to close these discrepancy cases even when they don't have any information. And I'll give you a little bit more about that. The other piece of information that is extremely concerning to me was under oath. We heard Ken Quinn from Department of State, Carl Ford from Department of Defense, Bob Sheets from Defense Intelligence Agency, stating unequivocally, no, we never give classified information to the Vietnamese. We would never give them source names. We would never give them locations where we think live Americans are being held. Now, Mike Peck, Colonel Peck, who recently left the Defense Intelligence Agency office, said, no, we are giving information to the Vietnamese. And people didn't really seem to react to that. My sister went to Vietnam. She went to Hanoi about 3 weeks ago. And what she found when she was there was she was handed 2 documents that we've never seen that pertain to my father. And what they were, they're right here, and they're just 2 pieces of paper. But what's on these pieces of paper is amazing to me. One is a complete live sighting list that has the name of the prison camp where my father was held, the place that this picture was taken, who took the picture, and how it was taken. And along with it was a list of 5 sources saying that they had locations or information about my father. And what we provided to the Vietnamese was the name of the source, their address as close as we could get it, and exactly what they knew about the photo. We've got people on here, we've got a general, Vietnamese general, we've got people in the ministry of the Cambodian government, we've got people that should be extremely credible. And instead of going out and talking to these people, what we chose to do, the Vietnamese have been saying, I was at the UN mission, and what the Vietnamese told me when the picture first came out and it all broke in public, they said, Ms. Robertson, if you will please tell us who is telling you these lies, live sighting reports. You tell us so we can punish them. We want to punish these people. They've told Ken Quinn, we want to punish these people. You tell us who's giving you these live sightings so we can go punish them. We walked over and we handed them the names of the sources so they can punish them. It was under oath that Colonel Cole, who is from our American Embassy in Bangkok, testified, they can't find the men on this list. They're missing. They can't talk to them. I talked quite a bit to the people that were involved in this today, and their explanation is, well, what else did you want us to do with it? We have to give it to somebody to do something with. I don't know if giving it to the Vietnamese is the right answer. I really hope this is raising some questions in your mind. The other part I want to raise, I'm not a public speaker. I do much better when people ask questions. And if something comes up that you don't understand or you have a question, I do hope that you'll ask me. But the other point I want to raise is there aren't just numbers out there. These are individual men. And the man on the left in this photo has a wife. He's got 4 children. He's got 6 grandchildren he's never met. It definitely affects a lot of people. They're not just names and they're not just numbers. My father was shot down on September 16th, 1966, 25 years ago. He was ranked in the top 1% Air Force pilots. He checked out the F-4. He was on the Inspector General's team. He was developing the air tactical maneuvers that we were using in Vietnam. He was writing papers that had never been written on the F-4s. He was top NATO pilot 4 years in a row. This man was a fighter pilot from his head to his toes. And he didn't go to Vietnam because he was ordered to. My father went because his squadron went, and he went because he's a fighter pilot. And he certainly never questioned whether the government was right or the government was wrong. Well, the government was involved, so therefore it must be right. I was raised that way too. You don't question what your government says. Red, white, and blue, and you simply trust what they say. I came to a very rude awakening that that's not the best policy. And right now I do question things. And I found that if I don't question things, I'm not going to get answers. And it's but for the grace of God that that you're sitting in the audience listening to me tonight and not standing up here telling an audience about you or having your family members stand up here trying to fight to get you home. And I think it's important that everybody understand it's not something that, gee, I'm involved in or Robert Dumas is involved in, but next time it might be you or your family or somebody that you know. And I think it's imperative that everybody keep that in mind, that it's not something that you can just turn the TV off or close the paper and it goes away. It's happened from every single war we've ever been in. And it's important that it's not acceptable. It's simply not acceptable that this happens. And as a family member, I'm very lucky that we've got people like Bill Hedman, that we've got people that stand up, Dr. Westbrook, people that are, as I said, that choose for whatever reason out of decency to be involved. Colonel Mike Peck chose decency when he sidestepped policy. And Mike Peck let me talk to a Cambodian source on the telephone at the DIA office, which was against DIA policy. He let me talk to this source, who had been trying to find the families for 6 months, even though the analysts, hands off, wouldn't let the source talk to us. And let me go pick this picture up, and let me get some names of people in Cambodia that were supposedly holding my father. At that point, we jumped on a plane. And we went and talked about that. But it would have been impossible. And as Mike Peck walked me out that morning of the Pentagon, he looked at me and he said, you know, right. He goes, I just kissed my career goodbye. He knew exactly what he'd done. And I told him there was no way I could not have asked him to do that. And he knew, he said, I knew exactly what I did. And he said, you know, if my whole career comes down to just doing this, then it's worth it. If it comes down to just getting one man home, then my entire career was worth it. I want to bring it back specifically again just for a moment. When I got this photograph and held it in my hands and took it to my mother, and she took one look at it, and her response was so immediate and so genuine as to who that was in the photograph. That was her husband. That was my father. And it was hard for her to identify that picture because she knew if she ID'd it, that I was getting on a plane to Cambodia. And I went, although the person I was going with, who was Bill Hendon, was quite knowledgeable in the area, I wasn't, and she was scared to death. But she couldn't not ID it. It was just too big. And when we got that photograph, we decided we had to, after I came back from Cambodia and we got that information, we had to work backwards to find all the evidence to see, could he be alive? Well, what we ran into when this hit the press was the government saying, case closed, he's dead. Vietnamese saying, case closed, he's dead. We said, let's delve into this. And we went into those files and we found out, well, I'm going to start from the beginning. My sister was in Hanoi. When she was in Hanoi, she went to the crash site. And she talked to people on the ground, Vietnamese villagers. And she was there doing a Scottish documentary. So some of this actually got documented on film. One plane went down in this province in Vietnam during the entire war, and it was a huge deal for this village. And she talked to the person, they said, that captured my father's backseat pilot. And the government has always told me, well, your father disintegrated in the plane, but we got his backseater. Okay. Well, she went and she talked to two people who captured two different pilots, two different capture stories. One described as about 40 blonde-haired, which fits my dad's description, and one described as about 20 very tall blonde-haired. One talked to a teacher or a student in English, which would fit the description of my father, and one didn't. And in comparing notes with my father's backseat pilot, who did come home and return to POW, we found out we've got two completely different cases here. And the person at the crash site recognized the pre-shoot down photo of my father. Oh my God, yes, that's the one I captured. Oh yes, that's him. Then we continued on and found out that a part of my father's file that had never been included, it just happened to be in one of the requests, and we had to go back about 10 years, was there was an interrogation report about another villager, that once again now fit in the description of the person my sister talked to, who did indeed capture a blonde-haired pilot 40 years old. And we're just continually surprised about what we're learning, because we've been told all this time that they knew nothing, that our government knew nothing about my father. Congressman Pete Peterson was a POW. He was shot down 6 days prior to my father. They had been close personal friends before they went to Vietnam. They weren't stationed together. But when Pete was shot down, my father's backseat pilot said, sure, we were concerned. Your father was quite concerned. And the day my father was shot down, Pete Peterson was pulled out, stuck in, completely singled out, which was highly unusual, he said, in that circumstance, put in an interrogation room and interrogated about my father. How did you know John Robertson? What did he do? And just continually interrogating him, which led Pete Peterson to say, he's been shot down. He's been captured and he's asked them about me. And at the end, as he started questioning the Vietnamese, pardon me? At the Vietnamese, when he started questioning the Vietnamese about, how do you know Robertson? And saying, do you have him? He pulled out my dad's ID tag and my dad's dog tags. And this we didn't learn until just this year, and interrogated him again and said, we have him. And when he kept pressing them, saying, where is he? He said, he's dead. And Peterson said, not for a minute did I believe it. I didn't know where he was, but I certainly knew they knew. My dad's backseat pilot never said he thought my father died. He said for the entire time he was in captivity, from 1966 to 1973, this backseat pilot thought he ejected early and that my father flew the plane back to the base and landed. He was amazed to find out that didn't happen. My father's commanding officer definitely felt my father was alive and on the ground and had been taken prisoner, kept him in that status past the 12 months and continued him there until Carter had everything changed over. My father was a Category 2. He was a Bessie discrepancy case, last known alive. Supposed remains were returned. When my father became a Bessie discrepancy case, they went over to resolve these cases. And when they went over there, the villager said, well, he disintegrated in the plane, but here's some bones. that we found. And of course they called us and said, we've got the remains. Turns out there were no remains. It was a rock and an animal bone. And although they told the Vietnamese a month later that those were not John Robertson's remains and were not related to him in any way, it took them approximately 16 months to tell my family the same information. In August of 1990, the DIA received this photograph. In November of 1990, they received a live sighting report on my father and a faxed copy of this photograph. And it was through another family that we had learned, it was from the Stevens family, that we learned, gee, there might be something on your father to go talk to the Defense Intelligence Agency about. And it was only last Friday, a week ago today, that I realized they had this picture in August of 1990, and they never told us. It's, Absolutely. When we received the fax copy, and Mike Peck let me talk to the source, and I went and picked up from a Cambodian source what I thought was the first photograph, there was a fingerprints that accompanied the photograph. And I went and I looked for those fingerprints. I requested from the Air Force a set of the fingerprints. They didn't have them. I requested from the FBI. They didn't have them. I went to the prior bases where my father had served. They weren't in those files either, although they had all expected them to be. My father had numerous secret clearance, top secret, very high up, and they fingerprint you every time you get a new clearance. And I got turned down in every request to find fingerprints. And unbeknownst to me, the Lundy family had also been told there were fingerprints, and they went on their own quest looking for fingerprints. The Stevens family went on a quest looking for fingerprints. Every single time we turned up empty. We've got 3 sets of fingerprints, different sizes. The FBI's been able to say, yep, all the prints that they say are John Robertson's come from one man. All the ones that they say are Larry Stevens come from a different man. And all the ones that they say are Albo Lundy are very big. And yes, they're a third independent individual. But gee, sorry families, we can't compare them to anything. Can't tell you if it's them or not, but they're good prints. Oh well. And what I'm leading to is there's a lot of questions here. The column, when I started filling out this column about how they closed the case, I came out with a list about this long as to why my father could be alive, and 1 point as to why he could be dead, and that was the word of a Vietnamese villager. Yet, we closed the discrepancy case, said, no, John Robertson's dead, book closed, go away. And the picture came out, only it ends up the same time they closed my father's case. Yet we didn't know they had the picture. It's hard to point fingers exactly, but you know, there's a lot of questions that need to be raised by a lot of people. There's a lot of evidence, there's absolutely compelling evidence that my father's alive. Enough so that, as I said, they reopened his case. But I believe they did it because it happened in front of the Senate Select Committee, because the senators simply couldn't believe what had just happened. Because it was on film, and although I had requested from DOD, from Carl Ford, from Ken Quinn, from Bob Sheets, numerous times that it be reopened from General Vesey, I was told, no. It's a technicality, we don't even use it. Yet every time we talk to the Vietnamese are the first ones to say, well, you know, the case is closed. Go talk to your government, your father's dead. I don't know what you want us to do about it. And I just get the feeling that we're sending a lot of mixed messages to the public. I don't know how many of you saw this picture. It got a lot of publicity. It made it in a lot of papers, a lot of news, and a lot of people thought that this photo was found in a Soviet magazine. Yet under oath, all the administration said, gee, no, if we made it sound that way, we were wrong. It was never found in the Soviet magazine. It was never said to be a hoax, and it was never said to be a fake. Sorry if we made it sound that way. Those were other pictures. It really didn't have anything to do with this. And it's what I keep finding And I'm sure that Mr. Dumas can relate to this, as I imagine most family members can. It continually comes back right here. The responsibility continues to sit on my shoulders. Sometimes I would like to just turn away for a minute, but it keeps being that if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it. That if you don't stand there and you continually push these people, it's not going to happen. And that's why we need everybody to stand up and push. Because, as I was saying before, it's not just me. It could be anybody. And I think that it's really important to keep that in mind. There's, as Mr. Dumas said, I could go on and on about discrepancies when you're trying to talk to DIA, what they say policy is, what reality is, that they don't always match. But what I'd rather do is close it and bring it up to questions. But there's a couple of things that I would like to bring up. It might seem overwhelming to those of you who are newly involved in just really learning about the issue and thinking that you might not be able to make a difference or what can you do. And I want to relate a small story to you. There was a huge storm at sea, and thousands of starfish got washed up on the shore. And this little boy noticed what was there. He ran frantically, picking them up and throwing them as he could into the ocean. And this old man came up, and he looked at him and he said, you can't save them all. You can't really make a difference. The little boy thought for a minute. He looked at his hand. He looked at the starfish in his hand and he said, but to this starfish it makes a difference. Through that starfish drank some water. You can make a difference if we just bring one person home, or if we just get to the truth. I don't know if my father's still alive or not, but I certainly deserve the truth, and so do you. And you can make a difference. Thanks again for coming today.
Please remember that time is running out for these men, and our concerted efforts are necessary to bring them home before it's too late. Beyond this, consider that our children may be asked to fight for their country one day. And if the present attitudes and policies are not changed, you might be a guest speaker at a future public forum, hoping that your friends would care enough to help you get your child home. It is said that evil exists when enough good men do nothing. Please, follow your conscience and do all that you can do. Thank you.